She was just a dirty, hungry orphan. The millionaire laughed, not knowing they were humiliating the only person worthy of inheriting that stage. Tiago walked through the courthouse hallway with steady steps, his father's will still fresh in his mind. The document handed him the Old Town movie theater, a building he'd always seen as a burden. To him, it was nothing more than the sentimental ruins of a man who never knew how to be a father. The young man, dressed in a sharp suit and with a cold gaze, was convinced he'd inherited nothing but bitter memories. Deep down, his mind was already made up. He would sell the property without looking back. His car glided through the narrow streets until it stopped in front of the theater's facade. The peeling letters on the marquee seemed to scream neglect. Tiago stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and shot a disdainful look at the building that once hosted packed screenings. His mind filled with sarcasm. How could anyone still see value in this place? Taking a deep breath, he walked toward the entrance, ready to close that chapter for good. The smell of mold and dust hit him as soon as he stepped inside. The place felt frozen in time, torn seats, stained walls, faded curtains. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the empty auditorium, almost mocking his presence. With every step, Tiago remembered the times his father had asked him to come here, and how he'd always refused. Now, ironically, he owned something he never wanted. With contempt, he stepped onto the wooden stage, which creaked under his weight. Here, where artists and musicians had once moved audiences, he saw himself as the only spectator of a silent tragedy. Broken spotlights hung from the ceiling, and in the corner, covered by a dusty sheet, stood an abandoned piano. Tiago glanced at it briefly, but looked away. To him, it was just more forgotten junk. The memory of his father crossed his mind like an unwelcome shadow. The deceased man had always spoken of the theater with passion, as if it were a temple of art. Tiago, on the other hand, saw only a worn-down place with no future. The distance between them had been marked by misunderstanding, and now this inheritance seemed only to deepen that divide. He took a deep breath, trying to push away any trace of emotion. As he explored the side hallways, he noticed old posters still clinging to the walls. They advertised classic films, concerts, and theater performances from decades past. Smiling faces, gathered crowds, applause frozen in time. Impatiently, Tiago tore down one of the posters and crumpled it in his hand. To him, it was nothing more than an annoying reminder of everything that meant nothing to him. When he returned to the main auditorium, his footsteps echoed louder. He felt as if every inch of that building challenged him to remember his father. His pride swelled, strengthening his resolve to end what he saw as a hollow legacy. Selling the theater wasn't just a business move, it was an act of liberation.
Still on the stage, Tiago pictured the future of the place in his mind. Demolished, making room for something modern, profitable, and free of emotional weight. Maybe a commercial building, maybe a shopping mall. Anything would be better than what felt like a tomb of memories. He smirked ironically, feeling satisfied with his own reasoning. But deep down, a strange restlessness began to settle in. It was as if the walls were watching his every move, holding on to secrets he didn't want to uncover. The silence of the place seemed filled with stories that refused to be forgotten. Tiago shook his head, ignoring the feeling, and stepped off the stage with determined steps. That night, alone in his apartment, he opened the folder containing the theater's documents. Among yellowed papers, he found an old photo. His father smiling next to musicians with that same piano in the background. Tiago closed his eyes for a moment, bothered by the memory. He tossed the photo aside and lay down, convinced that nothing would change his mind about selling the theater. If you believe that places hold hidden stories, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey, because what may seem like ruins can reveal something truly transformative. The next morning, Tiago returned to the theater with his lawyer. The man, practical and in a hurry, confirmed that there were already interested buyers. All it would take was one signature to settle everything. Tiago smiled arrogantly. Soon this burden would be lifted from his shoulders. Still, the lawyer suggested he meet the staff before officially closing the deal. Reluctantly, Tiago agreed. He walked through the lobby where a few people were still keeping the place minimally operational. The sound of brooms sweeping the floor, distant echoes of footsteps, and low voices filled the space. To him, it was just the sound of a pointless effort. He observed everything with disdain, like someone looking at a broken object about to be thrown away. The dim lights illuminated the ticket counter, where an employee was organizing old papers. In the corners, boxes of stale popcorn and outdated equipment revealed the neglect. Tiago felt a shiver, not of nostalgia, but of contempt. He wondered how people could cling to something so run down. As he walked through the theater aisles, he saw rows of torn seats and rusted projectors. The smell of dampness was strong, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. Tiago ran his hand over a ripped seat and let out a sarcastic laugh. "This place is a museum of failure," he muttered. The lawyer nervously asked him to be more careful with his words. Back on the stage, the piano stood out again, as if it had a life of its own. Even covered, it seemed to watch everyone, waiting to be awakened. Tiago quickly looked away, unsettled by the strange feeling. He didn't want to admit it, but the instrument had a quiet power over him, a presence that defied his disdain.
In the audience, a few employees waited for his arrival. Their faces were tired, their eyes anxious. Everyone knew what was coming. Tiago sensed their expectation and decided to show his authority. He stepped onto the stage and stood tall, ready to speak. His tone dripped with arrogance, as if he wanted to crush any last bit of hope. "You all know why I'm here," he began. "This place is finished. There's no more value, no future left. It's time to put an end to this charade." His words fell like stones, silencing the room. Some workers lowered their heads, others held back tears. Pleased with the effect, Tiago pressed on, even harsher now. His speech was interrupted by murmurs of protest. One voice stood out. It was Yelena, the new cleaning lady. She stood up with unexpected courage and said the theaters still mattered to the community. Tiago smirked with contempt, mocking her words in front of everyone. To him, she was just another dreamer clinging to the past. The lawyer tried to step in, but Tiago made sure to humiliate Elena even more. He said she and everyone else were disposable, as useless as the building they cleaned. The cruelty in his words left the room tense, almost suffocating. But it was in that moment that something unexpected began to stir, quietly, beneath the surface. Lara, Elena's young daughter, watched everything from the audience. Her eyes burned with anger and sadness as she saw her mother being shamed. Small in size, but big in courage, she stood up without fear. Everyone turned to look at the child walking toward the stage. Tiago raised an eyebrow, surprised and annoyed by her boldness. Lara climbed the steps to the stage with steady steps, challenging his icy stare. The employees watched in silence, stunned by the girl's bravery. The lawyer, speechless, tried to stop her, but she kept going. When she stood in front of Tiago, her eyes shone with determination. "You're wrong," she said with a firmness that surprised everyone. Tiago raised his eyebrows, intrigued, but quickly regained his composure. He crossed his arms and looked down at her as if she were an insect. "Wrong? Is a child going to teach me about business?" he mocked. The crowd murmured, torn between fear of his reaction and the hope rising in the girl's words. Elena, worried, stood up to call her back, but Lara didn't back down. The silence in the room grew heavier as everyone watched this unlikely confrontation. Uncomfortable,
Tiago decided to end it with one final arrogant remark. "This theater is trash, and the people who work here are worthless." He shot out. His words cut deep, like blades. But Laura just clenched her fists, determined not to stay silent. "My father used to say that art is what gives life value. And this place still breathes art. You just can't see it because you're blinded by your own pride." Her words echoed through the hall, as if the old theater had found its voice again. For a moment, Tiago felt struck. Elena rushed toward her daughter, trying to pull her off the stage. But Laura gently broke free and remained standing before the air. The audience, once defeated, now felt a flicker of hope. But Tiago didn't want to allow this rebellion. With an impatient gesture, he ordered the meeting to end.
The employees exchanged glances, torn between submission and the desire to support the girl. Some held back tears, others whispered words of encouragement. Elena, feeling embarrassed, hugged Laura and asked her to stay quiet. But Tiago, though trying to maintain his tough demeanor, couldn't hide his discomfort. The child's words echoed in his mind. He stepped off the stage with heavy footsteps, followed by his lawyer, and announced loudly that the layoffs would soon be made official. Tension spread like wildfire, yet when Tiago glanced at the covered piano in the corner, he felt a strange connection with Laura's gaze. It was as if the silent instrument was waiting for something. The lawyer urged him to leave, reminding him of his other commitments. Tiago nodded, but hesitated for a few seconds, casting one last look at the stage. The image of Laura standing her ground, defying him, would be etched in his mind. An uneasy spark had ignited amid his conviction to sell the theater. Elena led her daughter out of the room, scolding her firmly, but with hidden pride. "You can't put yourself out there like that, Laura," she said, her voice trembling. The girl simply replied, "Someone had to stand up for what he doesn't understand." Elena sighed, knowing she couldn't contain her daughter's strong spirit. Back in his car, Tiago closed his eyes and leaned into the seat. He tried to erase the memory of what he had just witnessed, but he couldn't. The girl's voice echoed like an open wound. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, and it irritated him deeply. The next morning, Tiago returned to the theater to finalize the paperwork. He found Elena cleaning the lobby, trying hard not to show the weight of the situation. The bucket of water and the broom stood as silent witnesses to her daily struggle. When Tiago saw her, he couldn't resist a sharp remark. "Still polishing a tomb? It won't change a thing." Elena lifted her tired but steady eyes. "It's not just a building, Mr. Tiago. It's a place that gave meaning to many people's lives." He laughed ironically and stepped closer. "Meaning doesn't pay the bills. Emotions don't fill bank accounts." Their exchange was intense. On one side, the hardness of someone closed off to the past. On the other, the determination of someone fighting for dignity. In a colder tone, Tiago continued, "You should be grateful you had the chance to work here this long. Soon there'll be nothing left to clean." Elena's heart sank, but she didn't lower her head. "I may lose my job, but I won't let you insult the memory of everyone who built this place." The tension rose when Laura quietly appeared, holding a music notebook. Hearing the argument, she stepped closer, ready to intervene. Annoyed, Tiago raised his voice. "Teach your daughter to respect her elders. Children shouldn't meddle in adult matters." Elena protectively hugged her daughter, but Laura held her gaze firmly. Elena took a deep breath and decided to confront the air. "You know what you're really afraid of, Tiago? It's not this theater's failure. It's the memory of your father, which still lives within these walls."
That's why you're trying to destroy everything, to erase what you don't want to feel. Her words, sharp with truth, hit him right where it hurt. Tiago stood frozen for a few seconds. The silence between them felt heavy, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water from the ceiling. He tried to laugh, but it came out forced. "Don't project your illusions onto me, Elena. I'm not afraid of anything." Deep down, though, he knew something had pierced through his wall of coldness. Taking advantage of the pause, Laura stepped forward and said, "My father isn't here anymore either, but his music still lives on. The theater isn't dead, it just needs to be heard again." Tiago looked away, feeling too exposed in the face of the girl's courage. Elena gently stroked her daughter's hair, proud of her strength. Unable to handle the weight of the moment, Tiago turned abruptly and walked out of the lobby. His footsteps echoed across the floor, but the words he just heard continued to echo in his mind. For the first time, his certainty had begun to crack. On the stage, hidden beneath the dusty cloth, the piano seemed to wait silently for the next move. The air in the theater, thick with tension, seemed to vibrate as if it were about to witness something transformative. Elena glanced at the instrument and, in silence, felt that the real battle had only just begun. Outside, Tiago took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, but inside, his mask of arrogance was beginning to crumble, revealing the pain he'd tried to hide for years. The theater was almost empty that afternoon. The sound of rain tapping on the roof echoed like a sad melody through the hallways. Hidden behind one of the rows of torn seats, Laura watched Tiago pacing the stage. He seemed in control, indifferent to it all, but his eyes betrayed a weight he didn't want to admit. Suddenly, Laura stood up and walked toward the stage. Her small footsteps echoed in the silence, drawing everyone's attention. Elena tried to stop her but couldn't. The girl stood in front of Tiago and spoke up firmly. "You think you can decide the fate of this place without even understanding what it means?" Tiago scoffed and crossed his arms, clearly annoyed. "You again? I told you, this is no place for a child." But Laura didn't back down. Her eyes shone with determination. "You say nothing here has any value, but I'm going to show you you're wrong." The silence in the room deepened, as if the theater itself was waiting for her proof. Elena rushed to her daughter, trying to persuade her to step down from the stage. "Laura, please don't do this." But the girl shook her head. "Mom, I have to." There was something unbreakable in her resolve, something Elena recognized as a legacy from her father. She sighed and, though still worried, took a step back. Tiago, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. "And what do you plan to do? Tell a little story?" His sarcasm drew nervous laughter from some of those present, but Laura simply turned toward the corner of the stage and, without a word, pulled off the dusty cloth covering the old piano. The sound of the fabric falling echoed like an invitation. The piano was dusty but intact. Its yellowed keys seemed to yearn to be played once more. Laura gently ran her fingers over them, like someone greeting an old friend. The audience held its breath, waiting for the unexpected. Tiago, meanwhile, felt an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. With her small hands, Laura took a deep breath and began to play. The first note sounded hesitant, but soon grew stronger and clearer. The music filled the theater with an overwhelming emotion, as if every chord awakened long-dormant memories. The sound reverberated against the walls, transforming the space into something sacred. The employees who had been hanging their heads now looked up. Some brought their hands to their hearts, others cried silently. Elena watched with tears streaming down her face, remembering her husband as she heard her daughter bring his art back to life. It was as if his spirit were present, playing through the girl's hands. Tiago stood motionless, his heart racing against his will. The melody pierced deep into his armor of coldness, reopening old wounds. He tried to resist, but he felt his eyes welling up. Memories of his father, of the past, of what he had never experienced, surged like waves threatening to drown him. When the music stopped, silence took over the theater. No one dared to applaud, as if still held captive by the magic of the performance. Laura looked at Tiago and said softly, "See, this place is still alive." He didn't answer. He just turned abruptly and walked off the stage, unable to handle the avalanche of emotions. Tiago hurried out of the theater and got into his car, trying to regain control. But the notes of the music echoed in his mind like a persistent ghost. No matter how hard he closed his eyes, the melody returned, breaking down every wall he had built. His breathing was heavy, and a knot tightened in his throat. That night, alone in his apartment, he opened a bottle of wine to try to silence his thoughts. He sat in front of the fireplace and stared into the flames, but the fire seemed to dance to the same melody Laura had played. He slammed his glass on the table, irritated. "It's just a piece of music," he muttered, trying to convince himself. But it wasn't just music. It was the memory of his father, who had so often spoken about the importance of art and emotion. It was the weight of never having valued it, of having rejected every attempt at connection. Overcome with helpless anger, he hurled his glass against the wall, letting the liquid drip like blood onto the floor. He lay down on the couch, but sleep didn't come. Instead, flashes of his childhood haunted him. His father smiling during a performance, inviting him to a concert, and him always refusing. Tears came against his will. His pride screamed for him to resist, but the music had already cracked open his heart.
The next day, Tiago went back to the theater, pretending it was just a casual visit. He told himself it was only to check on some paperwork, but deep down he knew the real reason. He needed to hear the sound of that piano again. When he stepped into the empty hall, he felt the same shiver as the day before. The stage was calling him. Laura was there alone, softly playing a few low notes. When she saw him, she stopped right away, surprised. Tiago cleared his throat, trying to hide his discomfort. "I just came to check how things are going." But his voice sounded uncertain, betraying his true intention. The girl smiled slightly, as if she understood more than he was saying. He walked closer to the stage and stood there, watching. Laura asked innocently, "Did you like yesterday's music?" Tiago looked away, pretending not to care. It was just a melody, nothing special. But the hesitation in his voice gave away how much it had really affected him. Laura didn't push. She just started playing again, this time a soft, gentle tune, almost like a silent invitation. Tiago closed his eyes for a few seconds, feeling the weight of the music break through another layer of his pride. He didn't want to admit it, but he was already hooked. Elena walked in shortly after, surprised to see the heir standing there, listening to her daughter. Her suspicious eyes narrowed, but she held back. She just watched quietly, sensing that something, even something small, was starting to change in him. Tiago left not long after, walking quickly to hide his own vulnerability. But as he stepped out of the theater, he knew he was lost. That music was already haunting him from the inside, and there was no escaping it. In the days that followed, Tiago tried to stick to his business routine, but Laura's music kept coming back to him like a soft, persistent shadow. During investor meetings, he'd lose focus. At night, his dreams turned into torment, always filled with images of his father next to the piano. It was as if the past, once buried, had come back to claim what he owed. He started spending more time at the theater, using paperwork as an excuse. Deep down, he just wanted to feel that charged atmosphere again. Walking through the hallways, he could almost feel the eyes of the old posters following him. Every smiling face seemed to mock his coldness. The silence in the theater wasn't empty. It was full of voices. One afternoon, he found Laura on stage practicing a different piece. She didn't notice him at first, completely focused on the keys. Tiago paused at the entrance, watching her quietly. When she finally noticed him, he tried to slip away discreetly, but the creak of the door gave him away. Laura smiled and said, "You came back." He just cleared his throat, unable to come up with a convincing excuse. Elena showed up soon after, carrying cleaning rags. Her suspicious gaze settled on Tiago, but she held back. "We have nothing to hide," she said firmly. Feeling the weight of her tone, Tiago replied curtly, "I'm just taking care of what's mine." But inside, he knew the truth. He was drawn to the life that Laura was bringing back to this place. In an attempt to resist, Tiago began making fun of the songs the girl played. "Pretty, but it doesn't change anything. A piano doesn't pay the bills." But Laura wasn't shaken. Music may not pay bills, but it can heal wounds, even yours. Her innocent words cut through Tiago like a blade, forcing him to look away.
Back in his apartment, the nights became unbearable. Tiago stared at the old photo of his father, the one he'd thrown away days before. He'd taken it out of the trash, wiped off the dust, and placed it back on the table. Something inside him was stirring, but he still couldn't accept it. His pride was fighting the vulnerability slowly rising within him. The investors, noticing his hesitation to close the deal, started putting pressure on him. "The longer you wait, the harder it'll be to sell," they warned. Tiago responded vaguely, not admitting that he was no longer sure about selling. His once unshakable conviction now felt rusty and uncertain. At the theater, the piano had become both his enemy and his refuge. Every time he saw Laura playing, something inside him broke a little more. He tried to ignore it, but the crack in his armor kept growing. Elena watched him cautiously, noticing how the once arrogant man was beginning to waver. But instead of relief, it made her uneasy. She still didn't trust him. Tiago began avoiding direct encounters, preferring to watch from the distance. He'd observe Laura playing from the shadows of the hallway. Every note felt like a soft blow, slowly wearing down the wall of pride he'd built over the years. One night, as he was leaving the theater, he glanced back and saw the faint lights reflecting off the piano. A strange feeling came over him, as if that instrument was the heart of something greater, something that insisted on beating even in the face of neglect. For the first time, Tiago admitted to himself that he might have been wrong. His nights turned into battlegrounds. He'd go to bed early, but couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Laura on that stage, her small hands drawing unexpected greatness from the keys. The sound followed him, not like a haunting, but like a call he couldn't ignore. He started walking through the city late at night, trying to quiet his mind. The empty streets mirrored his restlessness. Flickering streetlights, closed storefronts, oppressive silence. The world seemed asleep, but inside him a storm was raging. With every step, the rate of his inheritance felt more unbearable. One night he walked into a rundown bar, hoping to drown his anxiety in glasses of whiskey. But the background music, a pianist playing soft melodies in the corner, only brought his memories rushing back. Unable to bear it, he quickly paid his tab and left, ignoring the curious looks from others. The music followed him like an invisible echo. Back in his apartment, Tiago opened the drawers where he kept the theater's old documents. Among forgotten receipts and papers,
he found a folder filled with old letters, notes exchanged between his father and local artists. In several of them, Laura's father's name came up as a friend and collaborator. The realization hit him immediately. Tiago read one letter where his father spoke about keeping the piano on stage as a tribute to the late pianist. As long as this instrument remains here, he will never be forgotten. The words hit him like a punch. The piano wasn't just an object, it was memory, connection, promise.
With trembling hands, Tiago pressed the keys. The sound came out clumsy, but Laura encouraged him. "It's not wrong, you just have to feel it." Her words echoed inside him like a quiet call. For the first time, he allowed himself to laugh at a wrong note. Elena, surprised, smiled too, watching the ice between them begin to break. Slowly, Tiago began looking forward to these moments. He found unexpected comfort in Laura's smile and Elena's calm presence. It wasn't friendship yet, but something new was growing, a delicate bond woven through music and memory. One afternoon, as Laura played, Tiago closed his eyes. The melody brought back the memory of his father smiling. The weight he felt wasn't just pain anymore. There was tenderness there too. He swallowed hard, realizing the girl was giving back what he thought was lost forever, his ability to feel. When the music ended, Laura asked, "Are you still going to sell the theater?" Tiago hesitated, unsure how to answer. Elena, watching closely, saw the struggle written on his face. For the first time, he didn't seem so certain of his decision. That night, as he left the theater, Tiago looked back. The soft lights glowed over the stage, and Laura waved from a distance. He felt something inside him had already changed, and there was no turning back. Tiago's curiosity about the piano grew with each day. One afternoon, while exploring his father's old office, he found a locked drawer. After some effort, he managed to open it. Inside were yellowed letters, concert programs, and old photographs. Among them, he recognized the face of Laura's father, always beside his own. The letters revealed a deep friendship. His father had financially supported the pianist many times, helping keep music alive in their town. In one letter he read, "As long as that piano remains on the stage, his art will never be forgotten." Tiago felt a tightness in his chest, as if his father were speaking directly to him. He read and reread every note, every memory. He realized the piano wasn't just a forgotten instrument. It was a symbol of promise, continuity, and shared memory. Regret washed over him. For so many years he'd rejected the theater without understanding what it truly meant. Holding the letters, Tiago walked to the stage and sat before the piano. He ran his fingers over the keys, trying to picture his father next to his friend. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt longing, an emptiness slowly filled by a silent melody. Laura walked in just then and found him motionless, holding one of the photos. She approached slowly. "That's my father," she said, her eyes shining. Tiago swallowed hard. "Mine is here too." The girl smiled, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. Elena came in shortly after, surprised to see Tiago so moved. He handed her the letters, not hiding his vulnerability. "I didn't know any of this," he confessed. Elena read in silence, tears streaming down her face. "Now do you understand why this place matters?" Tiago could only nod, unable to speak. Feeling betrayed by his own ignorance, Tiago threw the letters on the table and sank into the couch. Tears streamed down his face, and this time he didn't try to stop them. For the first time, he wasn't just crying for the father he'd lost, but for all the time he'd wasted pushing him away. Laura's music finally made sense. She was carrying on something bigger than herself. Over the next few nights, Tiago began visiting the theater alone. He'd sit in one of the torn seats and stare at the empty stage. The imagined sound of the piano filled his mind. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and picture himself as a child, hearing his father calling him to come watch a performance. Regret washed over him. Elena surprised him on one of those nights. She found him sitting quietly, lost in his own ghosts. "I didn't expect to find you here alone," she said, still cautious. Tiago simply replied, "I think I'm trying to understand what I never wanted to hear." She watched him for a few seconds without saying a word. Finally, she gave a slight nod, and in her eyes, he saw a flicker of respect. For the first time, Tiago felt like he wasn't completely alone in this internal battle. That night, when he returned home, he finally fell asleep. But his dreams weren't just hauntings anymore. They were memories, mixed with a melody of hope that slowly began to mend the cracks in his heart. Morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of the theater, lighting up tiny particles floating in the air. Tiago arrived early, unannounced. He found Laura on stage, gently playing a soft melody as if she were having a conversation with the piano. He paused at the entrance, watching quietly. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to mock her. He just listened. When she noticed him, Laura looked up and smiled. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said, with the honesty only a child could have. Tiago cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. "I think I'm trying to understand what I never wanted to hear." She watched him for a few seconds without saying a word. Finally, she gave a slight nod, and in her eyes he saw a flicker of respect. For the first time, Tiago felt like he wasn't completely alone in this internal battle. That night, when he returned home, he finally fell asleep. But his dreams weren't just hauntings anymore. They were memories, mixed with a melody of hope that slowly began to mend the cracks in his heart. Morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of the theater, lighting up tiny particles floating in the air. Tiago arrived early, unannounced. He found Laura on stage, gently playing a soft melody as if she were having a conversation with the piano. He paused at the entrance, watching quietly. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to mock her. He just listened. When she noticed him, Laura looked up and smiled. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said, with the honesty only a child could have. Tiago cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. "I think I'm trying to understand what I never wanted to hear." She watched him for a few seconds without saying a word. Finally, she gave a slight nod, and in her eyes, he saw a flicker of respect. For the first time, Tiago felt like he wasn't completely alone in this internal battle. In the days that followed, Tiago started showing up more frequently. Laura always greeted him with smiles and curious questions. "Have you ever tried playing? Did your father play?" He avoided giving real answers, but the girl's persistence wore down his defenses. Slowly, he began responding with short, almost reluctant phrases. One afternoon, Laura surprised him. She held out the sheet music for a simple song. "Give it a try, please." Tiago backed away, laughing nervously. "I don't know how to play this." But Laura insisted, gently guiding him toward the piano bench.
With trembling hands, Tiago pressed the keys. The sound came out awkward, but Laura encouraged him. "It's not wrong. You just have to feel it." The words echoed inside him like a calling. For the first time, he allowed himself to laugh at a wrong note. Elena, surprised, smiled too, watching the ice begin to break. Slowly, Tiago began to look forward to these moments. He found unexpected comfort in Laura's smile and Elena's calm presence. It wasn't friendship yet, but something new was forming, a delicate bond woven through music and memory. One afternoon, as Laura played, Tiago closed his eyes. The melody brought back the memory of his father smiling. The weight he felt wasn't just pain anymore. There was tenderness there too. He swallowed hard, realizing the girl was giving back what he thought was lost forever, his ability to feel. When the music ended, Laura asked, "Are you still going to sell the theater?" Tiago hesitated, unable to answer. Elena, watching closely, saw the internal struggle on his face. For the first time, he didn't seem so sure of his decision. That night, as he left the theater, Tiago looked back. The soft lights illuminated the stage, and Laura waved from a distance. He felt something inside him had already changed, and there was no going back. Tiago's curiosity about the piano grew with each day. One afternoon, while exploring his father's old office, he found a locked drawer. After some effort, he managed to open it. Inside were yellowed letters, concert programs, and old photographs. Among them, he recognized Laura's father's face, always next to his own father's. The letters revealed a deep friendship. His father had financially supported the pianist on several occasions, helping keep music alive in their town. In one letter, he read, "As long as that piano remains on the stage, his art will never be forgotten." Tiago felt a tightness in his chest, as if his father were speaking directly to him. He read and reread every note, every memory. He discovered the piano wasn't just a forgotten instrument. It was a symbol of promise, continuity, and shared memory. Regret washed over him. For so many years, he'd rejected the theater without understanding what it truly represented. Holding the letters, Tiago walked to the stage and sat before the piano. He ran his fingers over the keys, trying to imagine his father beside his friend. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt longing, an emptiness filled by a silent melody. Laura walked in at that moment and found him still holding one of the photos. She approached slowly. "That's my father," she said, her eyes shining. Tiago swallowed hard. "Mine is here too." The girl smiled, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along.
That night felt different. Instead of heavy silence, the theater seemed to breathe relief. The piano, lit by the soft glow of the old lamps, took on a new aura. It was no longer a forgotten object, but an altar of memories. Tiago spent hours sitting and listening to Laura play. Every note now felt like a connection to his father, a bridge between the past and the present. The pride that once kept him distant was slowly turning into quiet gratitude. Before he left, Elena told him, "You have a choice. You can erase this legacy, or you can continue what began even before you were born." Tiago looked at the piano and knew there was no longer any doubt. Selling didn't make sense anymore. The theater had too much life left in it to be destroyed. In the early hours of the morning, back at home, he placed the letters on his desk. He looked at the photo of his father and whispered, "I think I finally understand." For the first time in years, he fell asleep with a light heart. Tiago's phone wouldn't stop ringing. The investors, growing impatient, demanded an immediate answer. "The market is ready. We can't afford to wait," insisted one of the most persistent voices. Sitting at his desk, Tiago looked at the letters and photos of his father and the pianist spread out before him. The pressure was mounting, but now there was something stronger than money: memory.
He tried to buy time, saying he needed to sort out some bureaucratic details, but every delay brought new threats. If you don't close the deal, we'll find another way to get the building. The words sounded like a final judgment. For the first time, Tiago realized this wasn't just a choice. There were outside forces trying to tear the theater out of his hands. At the theater, Elena noticed his unease. "They're pressuring you, aren't they?" Tiago nodded, exhausted. "They want to tear it all down, and I don't know what to do." Elena looked at him firmly. "You do know. You're just afraid to commit." Her words rang true, and he had no response. Laura, overhearing the conversation, approached with her direct innocence. "If you sell it, the piano will never be heard again, and what lives here will die for good." Tiago felt a shiver. The girl spoke as if she were the voice of the theater itself. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, couldn't pretend to be indifferent. The following days were a whirlwind. Offers poured in, lawyers called, investors held meetings, but Tiago found himself growing more attached to the theater. He spent hours watching Laura play, discreetly helped Elena with small tasks, and even got to know the longtime staff. The arrogant air was slowly blending into the community. Still, doubt ate away at him. At night, he dreamed of his father sitting in the audience, applauding after a performance. He'd wake up sweating, feeling like he had to make a decision soon. Time was running out, and the investors had already set a date for a final meeting.
One morning, as he checked his mail, he found one final offer, an absurd amount of money, enough to completely change his life. Tiago stared at the number, and his old pride stirred. What was worth more, wealth or legacy? The conflict inside left him paralyzed. At the theater, he walked through the empty lobby, trying to picture the building torn down. But in his mind, he heard Laura's melody again. The sound wouldn't let him accept the idea of demolition. Every note felt like a quiet cry of resistance. Elena found him there, standing still, staring at the stage. "You need to decide, but remember, if you destroy this place, you'll also be destroying a part of yourself." Tiago closed his eyes. For the first time, he admitted to himself he couldn't sell. But the battle wasn't over yet. The final meeting with the investors was scheduled, and there he'd have to show which side he was really on. The meeting room of a luxury hotel was the setting for the decisive encounter. Tiago walked in with his lawyer, feeling the weight of responsibility with every step. In front of him, men in suits waited eager to close the deal. Folders were open, pens ready. Everything pointed toward an inevitable outcome. "Mr. Tiago, just sign here and everything will be settled," said the lead investor with a confident smile. Tiago picked up the pen, but his hands trembled. In his mind, there was no silence, only the sound of the piano, Laura's laughter, Elena's steady gaze, and the memory of his father. He hesitated, looking down at the contract. The investors exchanged impatient glances. "We don't have time for games. Accept the offer and everyone wins." The words felt hollow. Tiago took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and remembered the line he'd read in the letters. "As long as this piano remains here, the art will not be forgotten." Suddenly, he set the pen down. "I'm not selling," he declared firmly. The room fell silent, followed by murmurs of disbelief. One of the investors slammed the table. "You're making a colossal mistake." But Tiago didn't back down. "It might be a mistake to you, but it's the only right choice for me." Tension filled the room. His lawyer tried to intervene, reminding him of the legal consequences, but Tiago stood his ground. "That theater isn't just a building. It's memory, community, art, and I won't let it be reduced to dust in the name of profit." His voice rang out like a hammer, ending the meeting. The investors stood up, furious, threatening retaliation. "You'll regret this," they warned before storming out. Tiago remained seated, exhausted but relieved. For the first time, he felt he'd honored his father.
even if he hadn't understood him in life. That night, he returned to the theater. Elena and Laura were on stage, waiting anxiously. When he announced his decision, the girl's smile lit up the dark hall. Elena took a deep, emotional breath. "So you've chosen to stay." Tiago nodded, and for the first time, smiled without a trace of arrogance.
Laura ran to the piano and began to play a joyful melody that filled the theater with hope. The few staff members present applauded enthusiastically. Seated in the audience, Tiago let his tears flow freely, without a care. The conflict was far from over. There would be challenges, debts, and resistance ahead. But in that moment, the theater was breathing again. And Tiago knew he had made the right choice, not just for the legacy, but for himself. News of Tiago's refusal spread quickly through the town. Many were surprised. The young, arrogant heir, once so willing to sell it all, had decided to save the cinema. The community reacted with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Some believed in his change of heart. Others saw it as just another vanity play. Tiago, however, was determined. He gathered the staff in the lobby and announced, "This place isn't for sale. We're going to restore it with the help of anyone who believes in it." The initial silence was broken by hesitant applause that soon grew stronger. Elena watched quietly, moved but still cautious. Laura was the first to approach, her eyes shining. "I knew you'd make the right choice," she said. Tiago smiled, a rare sight, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Actually, you're the one who helped me see." His words made the girl blush with happiness, while the staff exchanged hopeful glances. That night, Tiago walked alone across the stage. He ran his hand over the piano, and for the first time felt proud to be there. The memories of his father were no longer just pain, they were also inspiration. He realized that saving the theater was also a way of making peace with his own past. The days that followed were filled with hard work. Volunteers began to gather. Townspeople showed up offering labor, paint, lumber, and donations. The cinema, once given up for lost, now pulsed with life and motion. Every hammer strike and brushstroke was an act of redemption. Tiago threw himself into the work. He got his hands dirty with paint, helped move chairs, took apart sections of the stage. The employees, once hesitant and wary, began to see him in a new light. His arrogance gave way to humble, dedicated leadership. Elena watched him every move, sensing that the change was real. She remained cautious, but respect for him began to grow. "Maybe there's more to him than I thought," she whispered to herself. Laura, on the other hand, already treated him like family, calling him over to listen to new melodies she was practicing. Little by little, the theater was transforming. The walls took on new colors. The seats were restored. The roof repaired. The piano was cleaned and tuned, regaining its shine and its voice. With every note played, the place gained more soul. One afternoon, Tiago stopped in the middle of the room and looked around. The sound of people laughing, the noise of tools, Laura's music in the background. It all blended into a symphony of rebirth. For the first time in years, he felt like he was home.
But the challenges were far from over. The investors hadn't given up. And the rebirth of the theater also meant facing outside threats that were coming back stronger than ever. Weeks passed, and the cinema transformed before everyone's eyes. The old marquee was restored. The walls came back to life, and the stage curtains shone once more in deep red. The space, once sad and abandoned, was now breathing hope. It was as if the town itself was being reborn along with it. Tiago, now part of the group, worked side by side with the volunteers. He no longer wore perfect suits, just simple clothes stained with paint and dust.
The cold, distant air had disappeared, replaced by a man willing to blend in and learn. Elena, watching closely, began to trust that his change was real. Laura became the star of the process. Her music filled the space during volunteer sessions, bringing energy and inspiration. Whenever people grew tired, all she had to do was sit at the piano for everyone to regain their strength. Her presence was living proof that the theater wasn't just a building, it had a heartbeat. One afternoon, one of the longtime employees brought in an old projector, carefully restored. When they turned it on, the room filled with flickering images of classic films. People applauded, moved. Watching the scene, Tiago felt a pride he'd never known before. The community began to rally around the theater. Small business owners offered donations, local artists performed for free, families helped however they could. What was once a symbol of neglect was becoming the cultural heart of the town. However, the investors came back, furious with Tiago's decision. They sent lawyers and legal threats, trying to pressure him into giving up. But this time, he didn't waver. "This place is not for sale," he replied firmly. The community stood by him, strengthening his resolve. Reopening day was filled with emotion. The outdoor lights were turned on, the marquee glowed again, and people filled the streets to celebrate. Tiago, Elena, and Laura stood together on stage, side by side, a symbol of unity. The audience applauded on their feet, celebrating not just the theater, but the victory of memory over forgetfulness. Laura sat at the piano and began to play. Her music echoed through the packed auditorium, bringing both tears and smiles. Every note was a tribute to the past and a promise of a hopeful future. Watching her, Tiago felt a peace he'd never known before. When the last note faded, the crowd burst into applause. Tiago stood up, emotional, and declared, "This theater doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us." The audience responded with shouts of support and tears. It was the rebirth not just of a place, but of an entire community.
And deep down, Tiago knew his own life had been restored too. The man who had once arrived arrogant and empty now found purpose and family in a place he never expected. The reopening night was etched in the town's memory. After Laura's performance, people lingered in the hall, talking, smiling, taking photos in front of the restored stage. The theater, once left for forgotten, had become the beating heart of the community again. Moved, Tiago watched every face in the crowd, feeling he had found something greater than any fortune. In the days that followed, the rhythm of life changed completely. The theater began hosting film screenings, recitals, plays, and even small art exhibits. Local artists who once had no place to perform now had a stage to share their work. Tiago, who had once looked down on it all, was now its biggest supporter, devoting his time and resources to the cause. Elena had become his partner in the project. Organizing events, managing the team, and keeping the theater alive, she proved her strength and sensitivity. Laura, in turn, was the symbol of the entire transformation. Her music drew crowds and inspired everyone, turning the space into a true sanctuary for the arts. Though he still carried emotional scars, Tiago felt different. The emptiness that once consumed him had been replaced by real purpose. My father would be proud, he thought, every time he saw the auditorium full. Now he understood that the inheritance he'd received wasn't a burden, it was a gift that allowed him to make peace with his own past. One afternoon after a performance, Tiago found Laura writing her own music. Shyly, she showed him a sheet of music. "It's my first composition," she said with a smile. Tiago encouraged her warmly. "Your music will be the soul of this place. You're going to go further than you can imagine." As the girl played her new piece, Tiago closed his eyes. He felt his father's presence, as if he were sitting in the audience, applauding. Tears streamed down quietly, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not pain. The circle was complete. Loss had turned into renewal. Word of the theater's rebirth spread beyond the town. Local newspapers and culture blogs began writing about what had been accomplished. The space became a symbol of cultural resilience, showing how art can heal and bring people together. Tiago, who once cared only about profit, had become the guardian of a legacy. One special evening, Tiago gave a short speech before a screening. "This theater isn't just a building, it's a home for memory, for art, for all of us. And as long as there is music, it will never die." The audience responded with emotional applause, sealing the bond between him and the community. Laura, seated at the piano, began a new melody, her own composition. The entire room fell silent to listen. It was a piece full of hope, one that seemed to promise a bright future. Tiago, sitting in the audience, smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The legacy was secure, not just his father's, but his own. The theater was no longer a burden. It was a bridge between the past and the future. And in the hearts of everyone there remained one certainty. When welcomed, art can heal even the deepest wounds. So, do you also believe that art has the power to heal and transform lives? If this story touched your heart, subscribe now and join us for more unforgettable emotions. Your next inspiration starts right here.